This is Robert Capuccio. Welcome to the Self-Help Antidote, a weekly dose of reason, perspective, and insight, where we challenge conventional thinking and explore authentic strategies and insights around personal transformation. Our commitment to you is to bring you some of the world's leading experts in the domains of fitness, wellness, coaching, and behavior change, separating fact from fallacy.
Bobby Capuccio, welcome back to the U Project.
Thanks for having me, Craig. Good to see you.
Are you ready, son? Are you ready? I did just throw you in quickly there because you and I were having a casual chat. Can you have a casual chat about Donald Trump and politics in America and the state of the world? If that's possible, that's what we were just doing. But we were getting a little deep and dark, so I went, fuck it, let's record something. Let's do a podcast about something lighter.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that we're increasingly having the inability to have a casual chat about anything.
Especially in this. Well, that's what we try and do here.
I didn't mean here in the U Project. I mean here.
Yeah.
Fascinating casual chats and some very deep intellectual ones as well.
I mean, I think that Well, I think more broadly, like outside of the U Project, which is there a world outside of the U Project? Apparently there is, but it's a myriad of echo chambers, political and social and religious and cultural and fitness and food, and everybody thinks that whatever they think is the right thing, and everybody thinks that anyone who doesn't think like them is the wrong thing. And it's probably not going. Is that more than ever, do you think? Or is that just that we're more aware of it now, these echo chambers and the confirmation bias? And if you don't think like me, you're bad, you're horrible, I hate you, we're enemies. Is that more, or is it the same, but with more awareness?
Well, I don't know, but my guess would be both. I think we've always had these tendencies. I mean, we're tribal people, right? So you meet a different tribe, you don't know. They could have the best of intentions. I could be trading food for furs tonight, or they could kill me like on first contact. So like suspicion and aggression sometimes is something that I think is built into our DNA as a survival mechanism. So I don't think human beings have changed very much. I mean, what does it take? 1,000 generations for heredity, natural selection, and gene mutation to alter us in any meaningful way. So you figure the average life expectancy of each generation has been about 25 years. Yeah, so we're probably the same people we were 10,000 years ago and a little bit different than we were 50,000 years ago. But the environment we're in, I think, exacerbates some of those natural tendencies. I mean, we've never been fed monologues back and forth on a social media platform, inundated with people who are exactly like us, being forced into an ever increasing echo chamber that we're plugged into 24/7. So who knows?
And it's interesting because you've got to be, I reckon if you're going to start talking about echo chambers and, confirmation bias and this group versus that group and, the different kind of ideologies and philosophies and who's where and who's what and who's not, you got to also realize that if I'm being authentic and real, I have to realize that I am part of that because I literally have a group of people that follow me and listen to me and read me who, for the most part, probably think somewhat similarly, ergo the allegiance and the alliance. And then in the middle of that, like for me, I think it's really important to go, I wonder what I'm getting wrong, or I wonder what could be wrong. Because when I reflect and I think, well, have I gotten things wrong in the past? Only about 1 million. So what am I currently quite adamant about that could be completely fucking wrong? And I think unless you look through that lens of this is what I believe and this is what I think, but at the same time, I've been wrong frequently. So perhaps some of this, all of this, or none of this I could be wrong about.
Well, I don't know. My guess is that you, like every one of us, probably get a lot wrong and you probably get a lot right. I think a podcast is a really different environment, different dynamic, because you have a certain frame through which you look at the world and you have a strong opinion about it. And I'm starting to value strongly held opinion, not strongly held, but strong opinions that are lightly held, that are malleable. because
right.
you kind of have to have a point of view as an anchor point that people can relate to, from which to start a dialogue. Good luck starting a dialogue with just ambiguity. But on social media, that's going to bleed through to the people that it attracts. Where on a podcast, you're sharing dynamic ideas, and you have a very wide range of guests with different opinions that engage with you. And by extension, we're engaging with your audience right now. So I love podcasts because it's a medium to kind of vicariously flush out ideas between two or, sometimes more people. I think it's different than when you belong to a certain group on social media or an algorithm's trying to say, okay, well, what's Craig into? Well, we're just going to feed him people who think exactly like him. And eventually, you would come to the conclusion that, well, this is just the way the world is. No, it's just the way you are and the people that you're communicating with are. It's not necessarily the way the world is. So I don't know. I favor one medium over another.
Yeah, I think that idea that, like if, I don't know, let's say 10,000 people listen to you and me talk, right? And probably every one of those 10,000 people will have a different experience to some or all of what we're saying. Somebody might think this is interesting. Some might think it's boring. Some might think it's confusing. Some might have already pressed stop, and it's understanding that, there's my truth and your truth, and then the objective truth. And then with some things, I don't think there is an absolute objective truth, depending on what we're talking about. And I think that people don't sometimes, and this is me as well, you don't realize that this thing that you think is not the objective, practical, real world reality, but just rather your version of it that you think is the actual reality.
I get everything you're saying. I think there's one layer that we're missing, the we. So when you talk about truths, there are absolute truths that are truths regardless of how you feel about them. You can be completely ignorant to them. They still exist. And then there's your personal truth. So if you grew up in a very violent household, you might adapt the belief that people are dangerous. And you know what? You're right. They are. But that's not the only truth. But then there's also the collective truths. Like, we all agree on this. And I think that's where we have to be really careful. Some collective truths, obviously, like justice and fairness and respect for the individual. Those are very good. But I think when your thought processes and beliefs are tied in with a collective truth of an organization, a certain society, I think you run into trouble, because those can be manipulated. And because you so strongly identify with belonging to that group and believing that thing, you could be easily manipulated. And I think, very often we probably are, to varying degrees.
And of course, for all of those groups, you need to comply and conform and believe and align to be a member.
Yeah,
because if you go,
code.
That's it. It's like, yeah, sure, I'm a vegetarian, but every now and then I'd love a bit of steak. Sorry, you're out of the group. Sure, I'm a Christian. I don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah, but the rest of it, I'm on board. It's like, no, dude. No, these are not optional. Like, to belong to our group, you need to think this, believe this, and do that. Oh, okay. So it's a cult. It's like, I can't push back, or I can't, and I understand why that happens, but it is, and I've been in a few cults of my own in different shapes and sizes and forms. And it's
do you still have the robe? I mean, I see you still kept it with a haircut, as did I.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about, I think you and I have even spoken about starting a cult. How much it'd be fun for about a year, then it'd be a fucking nightmare. But again, if I was going to start
it's just cult, two old guys rationalizing being bold.
Yeah. I would call it a cult, though. I wouldn't pretend it was something else. I think that's the first win. You go, when people go, oh, that's a cult, you go, yes, it is. And then they're fucked. Like, what do they do then? You go, yeah, of course it's a cult. Of course it's a cult. We've even called it.
that's not going to work because you're not luring them in under false pretenses. So now they have the freedom of choice of whether or not to join the cult. What self-respecting cult gives that level of freedom of choice? Other cults will hang shit on you. You'll lose all respect from all other cult leaders. Don't do it. It's going to ruin your reputation.
It's going to tarnish my reputation. What about, do you think that what's the downside of, this is not the right term, but being open-minded? Like, where's the intersection between being open-minded and being vulnerable or gullible or naive? Like, because at the same time, most of us have pretty set beliefs about certain things. We have non-negotiables. Do we have to be open-minded about anything?
I think for me, the answers, not the best answers or the only answers, but the most plausible ones are somewhere in the middle. So whenever you say this or this, I get very suspicious. Yeah. It's somewhere within that middle range, and which side it's indexed more towards, I think is contextual. But for me, I went from being I'll speak from personal experience because I can't speak for everybody because they're already taken, aren't they? I went from being in my 20s highly dogmatic about what I believed. I was unwavering, unyielding. I knew I was right. I didn't necessarily think that everybody else was wrong unless it came to work practices. Then I was, highly opinionated. And I think it caused me a lot of pain and frustration, growth edges that kept me stunted. And it definitely didn't enhance my relationships and my ability to connect with others outside of work. But then I went the opposite direction to where I started challenging my own beliefs and I became hopelessly agnostic about all things. So my answer to everything was, it depends. I kind of think where I'm at now is an internal versus external frame. Internally, I think there's value knowing these are my principles. This is what I believe to be true, not absolute truths, but my truths. These are the rules I live by. So this is what I value. I think that gives you a level of consistency when everything else around you is beyond your control and increasingly unpredictable, which exacerbates the stress response or the adverse impact of the stress response. But I think when it comes to things externally facing, I try not to have very strong opinions about who people are or why they do what they do, unless there's something that so strongly contradicts one of my principles. Not even necessarily my values. I can associate with people who have different values than me, and I enjoy it because I feel the time I become enriched, I grow. But certain principles like justice or fairness. So if you feel like, people of a certain height don't deserve the rights and the dignity that I deserve, that's kind of a problem for me. But with everything else, like I said, I have very strong internalized opinions that are held quite loosely.
I think also, like, what might be absolutely true for you might not be for somebody else. Like, it's true for me that eating 2 meals a day works. And I've got evidence and data, and it's true for me. So for me, 2 meals a day are great. But I wouldn't recommend it for anyone else necessarily because they're not me. They don't have my body. They don't respond necessarily the same as they may, but they probably won't. And so there's this, I think you can realize that for you, certain beliefs or ideas or truths might be super valuable and appropriate, but knowing that that's just for me, it might not necessarily work for the next person. Like I've spoken a lot about the fact that I didn't want a job when I was young. I wanted to work, but I didn't want to be an employee. And I realized I didn't think that was globally the best idea, but I realized that for me, that was a good idea. And it turned out that I was right about that. But then to pursue that, fully knowing that this is not a general thing, this is a Craig thing. And so when I would talk to people and I would coach them or mentor them or help them, I would not on any level try and sell them on what works for me, but rather to try to understand them. Of course, a coach should do this, but to figure out where they're at and what they value and what might be the ideal, path or process or protocol for them. But it's like these things can be true that, or these things can be simultaneous in that for me, this is true, but for you, this is false or this is untrue.
Yeah, I wonder why there's such a strong need, not even desire, for consensus. Like, why is it unacceptable for two people to hold totally different frames of reference, different opinions?
That's a great question.
Why do you need to agree with me down to like what we eat? Like, why is that so? I think it could be a couple of things. I know for me, I was so insecure. When I was in my 20s and I was rigid, I thought if I let up for even 1 second, I was going back. I was going to slip back into a very dangerous situation. And I was getting all these inputs that gave me hope. Like, if you think like this, if you behave like this, if you follow this life philosophy and formula, it will work out for you as long as you put in the work. It's inevitable. And there are two types of people in the world. And, you could be of the good kind, and then, there's the bad kind. And they're bad because they choose to be bad. And it's like, okay, great. So I'm guaranteed success as long as I grind. But I still had all this insecurity and fear that I was going to be found out. And I still had an unhealthy attachment to what people thought of me, even though I pretended that I didn't. So if I encountered somebody with a completely different philosophy, that was threatening to me. Oh my God, what if they're right and I'm wrong? Then I have no guarantee.
Yeah.
Then I'm not safe. I am in crisis. I am in threat. I haven't really moved beyond the circumstances that I so desperately tried to escape from. I think that's one aspect. Then there's the aspect of, maybe people are just secretly, it's kind of like a shadow characteristic. Yeah. It's unacceptable for me to come out and say, I enjoy hurting people because I am resentful and bitter that my life did not work out the way I thought it should have worked out for me. So there's this enemy. And all of the problems in the world are because of people like this. Yeah. So me, I'm not this horrible human being that hates people who disagrees with me or will maliciously try to harm individuals who have done nothing wrong to me or objectively nothing wrong at all. That's not me. Like, I'm a good person. What I'm doing is defending righteousness and truth because that's the enemy. Right. We're not. What I'm really not doing is taking responsibility for the fact that, hey, your life might suck because things happen that was outside your control, but there's not this enemy to blame. It's kind of like when you were in school, like my dad could beat up your dad. Like if you believe that there's one type of person that's responsible for all the evils in the world, and you and people like you are responsible as being the beacons of truth and goodness, that is a juvenile way of looking at the world. You got to look a little bit deeper and take a little bit more responsibility. Again, not saying that anything that is causing that resentment is your fault, but you do have the ability to respond. Responsibility. I think that's a far more constructive way than creating an imaginary enemy to aim all of your angst at, which I think with some people might be the case.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how much how many of us, how often think that whatever's not working in my life, it's got nothing to do with me. It's like, well, there's a fair chance it's got something, and like you said, there are a lot of extraneous variables. Bad shit happens to good people. We know that. We're not saying that it doesn't. We're not saying that what happened to you isn't real or isn't valid or isn't horrible. But then there's still, okay, so we get that, we acknowledge that, but here we are now. And that's, being able to work through the shit, like just being able to roll up your sleeves and go, look, this is unfair. This is tough. This is horrible. And yep, I agree with you. and today's a new day. And even though all that's happened, what are you going to do today? What decisions are you going to make? What action are you going to take? And how are you going to do the very best you can to optimize you and what you have to work with? And I think also there's another bit to that you were talking about where I just wrote down here, the need to know. You know, it's like when we, like you said, the need for consensus, like why do we have to agree? Also, why do we have to have an opinion? Or why do we have to, like, oh, what do you think of this or that? I don't know. Or what do you know, the amount of times where people have asked me like a medical question because, you know, they think, and I'm like, I don't know. They're like, but what? I go, well, one, I'm an exercise scientist, and even then, you know, a 5 out of 10. But, you know, you're literally asking me a question you should ask a neurosurgeon, you know, just going, oh, look, I don't know. I could make some shit up. You know, like the amount of times people have said, can you put your hand on my shoulder or something similar? And I do that. Then they move their arm. Oh, what's that clunking? I go, fuck, that feels and sounds terrible. I've got no idea, but good luck with that. You know, it's like me diagnosing some problem, some clinical problem without the information, without the experience or the training. It's like, I don't know, dude. I don't know. And I don't know what happens when we die. And I don't know whether this is right or wrong. And I just don't know. And also, I don't know if I'm right about this. This is what I think, but also I don't actually know. That's why it's called a belief or faith or a thought. Like this compulsion that we seem to have to want to know things and to have certainty in a world that is largely uncertain. It's almost like an emotional handicap.
I think our need to know things kind of drives our growth, obviously. I mean, if we didn't need to know, nobody would have built ships and sailed across the ocean. But it's this, that there's a dark side to it as well. Maybe it's because there's so many things we don't know that it's just grasping at a level of certainty so we could feel a little bit safer.
Yeah.
But I mean, for me, people who are willing to live in the question, not necessarily have the answer, I respect those people. Like there's nothing more respectable than an educated person authentically saying, I don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, wow, that's curious. And maybe it's like, hey, let's go find out. Or maybe it's just, you know, I don't know. I'm not really interested. But there's this thing about how we interact with ourselves that is probably even more important than how we interact with other people. And this is something I've really struggled with, still do. So I find it fascinating. You know, I've kind of looked at things like self-compassion when people talk about things like that as a bit self-indulgent and almost the antithesis of mental tenacity or grit. And God, the more I'm diving into this, I kind of knew like there's some empirical evidence out there that would suggest I'm dead wrong, but I'm discovering increasingly that I couldn't be more incorrect. Have you ever read any Kristen Neff or Susan David?
I have not.
I think you'd love Susan David. She'd be a great guest for the show, actually. And in like Kristen Neff's research, people who are compassionate with themselves. And
what is she? Can I just ask, what is her field?
Yeah, psychology.
Yeah.
So basically, people who approach themselves with acceptance and compassion, like you would if you were observing a flawed person make mistakes. You wouldn't condemn them. You wouldn't say, well, what you do is reflective of who you are. No, it's just what I did. It's not the totality of who I am. Unless, of course, you're a serial killer. And then, yeah, that's really bad all around. No rationalizing that. But people who act from a space of grace with themselves and acceptance of their limitations, their flaws, where their knowledge ends, things that we're talking about, tend to take a lot more personal responsibility, and they more readily transform and grow throughout their lives. I think, if I'm not stuffing this all up, she did an experiment where there were people who operated with a high level of self-compassion, and those that, pretty much had globalized internal beliefs about themselves that were not kind. People like that. We've probably been people like that, where you do something, God, how can you be so stupid? Yeah. And in a job interview, when it came up, discuss some of your weaknesses and shortcomings, the people who were highly self-compassionate and accepting were able to articulate and take responsibility for what their weaknesses were, and either accepted it and they had ways of working around it, or they were working on transforming and becoming better, where other people who lacked self-compassion became highly disturbed and flustered, which is really not a good look in an interview. So we kind of look at these things like acceptance and self-compassion as being soft qualities. They're nothing of the sort. I think it's reflective of strength. What I wonder is, does compassion just beget compassion? Are we discompassionate with other people, and do we have no tolerance for people who see the world through a different lens than us, because we hold that same space of complete intolerance for ourselves in our inner world? I wonder if there's an inverse kind of causality with that. My guess would be, yeah, probably.
I love that. Where does self-compassion, can it spill? Like, it seems like a good idea, but so are we talking about, like you were talking there about in a job interview, they might be able to identify certain weaknesses or limitations, but then with the capacity to, without beating yourself up, then commit to working on those things, to improving, to learning, to growing, to grow, to evolve. So it's not just about self-compassion, but also being able to then leverage off that and do something positive.
Oh yeah, definitely. But I think what is becoming more obvious to me is, if you don't have that self-compassion, you're not going to get to that point. You're just going to keep ruminating over I am, and whatever comes after that is probably not constructive, and it's probably not accurate. But once you start to integrate that thought pattern and the emotional consequence, first of all, you're not very resourceful. That's not really good for utilizing your prefrontal lobes to their optimal capacity. And when you have that internalization of that identity, you're bound to, or you're far more likely, I should say, to kind of repeat those behaviors that you strongly identify with. Like I'm so fucking lazy. Well, what do lazy people do? Not much.
Yeah.
That's not you. You might have had a lazy Sunday. I don't know, maybe a lazy Friday and Saturday as well. But is that something you engaged in, or is that who you are at your core? That's not useful. Yeah.
Or I guess even, I've been lazy this week or whatever, but what I'm going to do starting now is this, or, where you can acknowledge something and build some kind of momentum off the back of that awareness without the self-loathing thrown in.
Yeah. Or maybe a little bit of compassion decreases your level of reactiveness to what happened. You might ask yourself some better questions. Like, if I had a friend of mine who said, I took 3 days where I did absolutely nothing. It's like, oh, wow. Sounds like you were really exhausted. How was your week? I would ask a couple of questions. Person's probably, maybe those 3 days were the most productive thing they could have possibly done. I mean, if Dmitry Mendeleev didn't quit and just take a nap, we wouldn't have the periodic table, would we? Because there's a point where you're grinding your prefrontal lobes into absolute submission. And you have to step back and just let your default mode network operate in your favor. So, it's just, or you know what? Maybe you really were lazy. What does that mean? It means you were lazy. And like you said, all right, maybe it's time to make a change. What's my first step in doing that? What's going to be different today? What's my plan? Yeah. What's the one thing? Where do I start? That's going to be a far more constructive conversation. if you're not engaging in the emotional intensity that comes along with self-loathing. And I'm not saying if you're doing something like really wrong, you don't deserve to feel guilty. I think guilt and pain and a little bit of suffering is good when you do something that violates your values or hurts somebody else. In even a worst case scenario, but long-term internalization of shame is probably not a good transformative strategy. It's probably one of the worst things you can engage in.
It is true that, when we're in the middle of things, sometimes it's hard to have perspective because you're in the middle of it. But when you step back, have 3 days off, for example, or 3 hours off, or, you're in a different place, perhaps geographically, you can see things that you couldn't see before because you're in either metaphorically or literally in a different place. And I always find that you travel a lot. I travel a fair bit. And I find that I see things differently just when I'm in another state or another country. Like the way that I think about things is different just because I'm in a different environment. Mm-hmm. And I'm in a different room. I'm looking at an ocean. I'm eating in different places. I'm talking to different. It's like, oh, wow. The way that I get better in that spot is to get away from that spot because I can have a level of perspective and understanding and insight when I'm away from the thing than when I'm in the middle of the thing. I can't see it. It's like I can't see my house when I'm in my house. I've got to get out of the fucking house, walk to the other side of the street and go, oh, my gutter is falling down. I didn't know because I've been in the kitchen for 3 years. Oh, the fucking 3 of the tiles have come off. Oh, I needed to get out of my house to see what was really happening.
That is so smart. Like sometimes just changing your environment is the exact thing you need to formulate a different perspective. I love that. I can't see my house if I'm in my house.
I can't see it. I've got to get out of the fucking joint and walk over the road or get back. And hey, I wanted to ask you before, you said when you were younger and there's a lot more parallels than a lot more convergence than divergence, they say in science, Bobby, as you know. But I reckon you and I were probably quite dogmatic when we were younger. I was, and you said you were. Tell me, as much or as little as you want, me and the listeners, what are some things that either you've just revisited where you're like, I'm not sure about that anymore, or you've done a 180, or you've let something go and let something else in? Like if you could, because I think this understanding and being prepared to learn new things and unlearn old things is hugely important.
I'll talk about 9/11 because there's been certain, like everybody has milestones or these significant events that change the course of their life. One of them for me was 9/11 because I lived down by the World Trade Center. So I was right underneath those towers. And I think up until 9/11, like I have friends of mine who were really tight and we get on really well. But when they were traveling with me prior to 9/11, they hated it because I was so difficult to travel with. I would get into the office every morning at 6 a.m. I would not leave the office until probably 8 p.m. And when we were on a road trip, like I used to travel with my friend Rob, who is he's one of the greatest presenters, teachers I've ever worked with. And you know those like in-flight magazines? Yeah. They have all like the cars and the watches, and he'd flip through one and he would show me something. Like, oh, check this out, sitting next to me. And with complete, God, this is ridiculous. With complete disdain, I would look over at him, my textbook in hand, and I would say, travel time is working time. You should be preparing. Wow, thanks. This is going to be a fun trip. And I kind of had that personality type to the degree that my girlfriend at the time was in my apartment during 9/11, and she has like a lot of stuff coming down on top of her, literally. And she has no idea what's going on because I had no TV in my house. I had no radio because to me, I used to call it the electronic income reducer, the TV. And
radio. My God. I'm going to write that down. That is
radio.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that is so charming. You could tell like how hot I was to her. She must have been really impressed.
Can I just say it's a wonder you had a girlfriend, dude?
I didn't have many, and the ones I had, it was. I mean, guys, like I'm still friends with these people, and I'm just like, how did you do this? And then radio.
I've traveled with you quite a bit. I think you improved since those days.
Oh, yeah, it was a complete turnaround. You're talking about a 180. And radio was chewing gum for the brain. It's like I had all these beliefs. Like all I had around me was books. Like this like before social media, books, CDs. I even had those cassette tapes, which were kind of outdated at this point, but they still had value to me. And I couldn't even communicate with her. Like I couldn't, it was so hard for me to call my girlfriend. I was in Midtown and say, hey, get out of my house and start walking north as fast as you possibly can. And I had to come down and get her. And then living in lower Manhattan, I started getting progressively sicker and sicker. And I think how I described it once, because it's hard to explain, is that to produce a thought, it felt like somebody was cutting through my brain with a jagged, rusted piece of metal. And that's how I functioned. So I couldn't work 15, 18 hours a day. I could only work like 3 hours before I was completely wiped. So hang
on. I need the connection between what are you saying after 9/11?
Yeah, because I was getting so sick living in that toxic dust cloud.
Right. And so this living in that post 9/11 toxic dust cloud was fucking up your brain function.
Yep.
Right.
And it was such an ego deconstructing experience. And then after that, I was living down there for a while. And in, I think, what was it? Late June. Anyway, it's probably late June.
I love your terms. I'm sorry to interrupt, but just riff on ego deconstructing experience. I'm writing that down. I love that. So what do you mean by that? Is that because you got your sense of self and self-worth through being, having this immense brain where you're constantly learning and then all of a sudden
you are how smart you are how productive you are your outcomes, you are your work ethic, period. Outside of my role professionally, I had no definition for who I was, nor was I interested in developing one. So it was hard for me to be me. I didn't realize it at the time. I thought I was living my best life, but other people around me had quite a different experience, which probably still persists today. But in everything that I thought I was and everything that I thought made me valuable, being in question and being threatened, I kind of went into a panic. And then I moved to the UK, June 2002. And I kind of started up again with my rigid behaviors and my lectures about work ethic. And this person who I was working with, the client, Helen, who was kind of a mentor to me, switched on lady, brilliant. She's like, you're kind of getting in the way here. And the way you engage in work doesn't work for you and it doesn't work for anyone else. And at one point, we were on the phone and we were getting into an argument a little bit, which I was on the losing end of. And she said, okay, this company you're consulting for, we've been a successful business longer than you've been a nation. Do you think we were clueless until you basically rocked up? We didn't have any of the thoughts that you're having right now. And she's like, if you would have a little bit more fun in your work and connect on more of a deeper emotional level, you would be more effective without being this way. But you know what else would happen? Other people around you would be a little bit more effective as well. And I was like, okay, I was so physically worn out that, like when sometimes when you're really exhausted, your plane's delayed and you don't sleep as much, which is catastrophic for cognitive performance, but you get up the next morning to do a presentation and you're so much better because you just can't be asked about self-editing and you're just like putting it out there. I was like that for months at a time. So I just started experimenting with a new way of being. And I also kind of had the thought, wow, you know what? I've kind of really poisoned my body living down there. I wonder how long into adulthood I'm going to live. I didn't say to myself, well, if I was going to die tomorrow, what would I do today? How would I live my life? That's stupid. I don't know if I would shower or brush my teeth. Kind of not a great strategy for life. But what if I was going to die 6 months from now? What if 6 months from now, I've got all these toxins in my body and it gets really bad? I'm going to approach my work and only do what it is that I absolutely love to do and serve people that I love working with and for. And I started constructing my life around that.
I love that. I love that lesson. And I love that kind of, thank God for Helen as well. Thanks, Helen. Was that her name, the English lady?
Helen. I'm not gonna say her surname, just to respect her.
Yeah, we'll just go with Helen.
Yeah, Helen.
How long? This is just a curiosity for me. So you're in the post 9/11 mayhem and dust and toxicity, and your brain didn't work, and you felt like a rusty blade going through it, etc. How long before you felt or it worked? Like, how long did that last before you felt like you were somewhat back to normal?
Years.
Really?
Years. That was a struggle. And when I say I made this decision, I fluctuated in and out of it. Yeah. So every day was a battle because those old patterns would start to reemerge. My neuroticism became intense because I felt how ineffective I was. I felt how I wasn't performing. My brain wasn't doing what I needed to do to the same level it was before that. But as I started looking at people who had kind of the same belief systems as I did, something really interesting happened. And Paul Taylor was part of this. This was all around, this was going back into 2008, where I was on a circuit and I was looking at all these big self-help speakers. They were rigid, they were judgmental, and they didn't seem very happy. On the surface, they seemed great, but they weren't the same person off stage that they were on stage. Yeah. And then, mutual friend of ours, Richard Boyd, rings me. And at this point, I'm working in education with a company, and he goes, "Oh, that I really wanted to get away from, because I didn't think that it was a great environment for me for a lot of reasons." And Boydie calls me and says, "Hey, I want you to come to Australia. We got tons of speaking tours. It's gonna be like a whole month full on. Then we'll go meeting of the minds. Then we'll go up to Colorado, come back to San Diego. So this is gonna be a 6-week endeavor. Oh, and by the way, I'm not really sure if we're gonna be able to pay you. It all depends how the project goes. So it's like, you want me to get on a plane, travel halfway around the world, to work nonstop, constantly, and you're not even sure if you'll be able to pay me for it." I was like, "Okay, book me a ticket. I'm in." So for me, this sounded like a great deal. I got on that plane and I started hanging out with and these were my friends before, but I spent some serious time observing OD and Boydie and Taylor and Michelle. We all worked very, very hard, but there was this deep commitment to the purpose and to one another. And there was this deep enjoyment that happened. It's almost like getting into a state of flow, kind of like when you're on stage or when you're focused on writing something with no distractions. You know why you're doing it. But it was like that conversationally. So I thought, if I keep thinking like these other people that I just left behind and doing what they do, I'm going to become just like them. But if I start thinking like these people here, and I start engaging in the behaviors they engage in and put myself in the environment they put themselves in, I'm going to be a lot more like them. And I looked at, like, let's say OD, for an example, who will change the energy dynamic of a room just by walking in it. And everybody feels uplifted. Everybody feels like they're engaged, they're having fun, and it's safe. Yes. And out of all of those people, who feels that the most? OD. I was like, do I want to be like OD like years from now? Yeah. I kind of do. So I just completely changed direction. And that's what led to the formation of PTA Global back then and that whole trajectory. But I did live my life where I'm only going to do what I would do if I only had 6 months to live. And there were some benefits to that. And then, there have been obviously some major drawbacks, but that was my decision and that was my path.
How do you go now disconnecting from work? Because I feel like I'm probably, you and I are probably quite similar. Some people would look at how much I work and how much I do, and perhaps quite rightly, like by their standards anyway, they'd go, you're a workaholic, or you work too much, or you fuck around too little, or whatever. But in my defense, Your Honor, none of what I do really feels like right now. You and I are working, well, you're kind of for you, but this is a podcast. We're sponsored. It's part of my job, but there's nothing about this that to me is a work experience. It doesn't feel like work. Feels like I'm in the middle of a conversation I'm interested in with a guy that I've known a long time and love, right? That's it. That's for me. I don't feel like I've had a job for the last 35 years, but what about you? What's your relationship with work? Is it healthier than it's ever been, or is it problematic?
Oh, I so want to talk about this. Wow, this is something I want to talk about because I'm involved in an advanced long-term coaching project or coaching curriculum that I'm going through, and we were just examining the work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi with flow. I want to get to that because I think that is, when you talk about like what is life about, I think flow is definitely related to it in a highly important way. But for me, I can completely, there's something that I talk about in the sectors that I work in, and I learned this from my wife, and I call it quit every day. So as a filmmaker, when she had her film company, she would work 18 hours a day. And, she's formerly a trained engineer, a IT engineer. So she would do like editing, she would do sound, directing, like so all these different roles that are really unique for one person to do. I was like, I wonder how she can do it. The writing, and it was exhausting. Like she would just sit at her computer pouring sweat, and she'd be there for another 6 hours. I'm like, that is extreme physical and mental endurance. And at the end of the day, though, she would do something that a lot of people don't do. It was almost like she was like, you know what? I quit. I quit the project. I quit my company. I'm done. And she would pour herself a glass of wine. Now, I'm not recommending wine as a coping strategy, but that worked for her. And if it works for you, great. But she would pour herself a glass of wine, turn on Netflix, and in her mind, she didn't have a company anymore. She didn't work anymore. She quit. Yeah. The next morning, she would wake up and start all over again. And at the end of that day, she would quit. So it's like this quit every day thing, I believe, is very helpful, because a lot of times what people do, especially me, I'm a ruminator, is I'll take a day off from work because I know it's important and there's other things I want to do, but then I'll think about work. I'll think about this conversation. You're not really off work. You're not really taking a mental break that's going to allow you to re-engage in a more effective way. What are you doing? So there's this quit every day thing that I've been getting better and better at, but I can kind of unplug from work because I do love conversations. I do love people. The caveat is I have a very hard time not working if I haven't been working, if you know what I mean. Yes. Going to dinner after a long day of work where I feel like, wow, we've accomplished something far more important than I've accomplished something. that time out is so deeply enjoyable, where when I go on holiday, I get about 2 days before I start losing my mind, because there's not an achievement. There's not a striving for something. You're just hanging out. And it's like, okay, today we're doing this bus tour, and then we're going to this pub. And it's like, okay, great. Tomorrow I'll wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and gouge both my eyes out because I can't take any more of this shit.
I did a podcast a couple of weeks ago called An Unambitious Life. I think you should listen to it. It is like sometimes just to go, I mean, how many people do you know and I know that what the world from the outside looking in, you'd say super high achievers. And some of them are great. Some of them are happy, fulfilled, but also some of them are not. Some of them are pretty sad, pretty depressed, pretty anxious, pretty medicated, pretty sleepless. But from the outside looking in, they're crushing, killing, grinding, and winning at life. And then there are other people, like one of my best, my longest best mate in the world, Vin, is it's not.
How long is he?
He's very long. He's 70 feet long. Longest standing, I should say. But like we've been friends since we were 8, 9. And, I went one way, Vin went another. He went and did a trade, became a Sparky, lives in the country, and a great life and a great wife and great kids and grandkids. But in terms of the context of what we call the high watermark of like, he's just a dude living a life and it's a great life. But I look at him and I think he is one of the most successful people that I know, maybe in the top 3 when I factor in. He loved his career. He worked on oil rigs in the middle of the Bass Strait, which is the water between Victoria and Tassie, Bobby. So in the middle of the Bass Strait, working on oil rigs, week on, week off forever. Great wife, great kids, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, financially, all good. And I look at him and I go, yeah, for me, that's a high water. I think in many ways much more successful than I've ever been. But it's like that. How do we evaluate that? How do we, like, at what point do we stop hurrying and rushing and grinding? And like, do we ever stop doing that? And for some people, maybe we don't need to, but yeah, I wonder what the trade-off is in there.
Well, for me, my definition of success is if you wake up in the morning and there's something you really want to do, there's a way that you want to spend your psychic energy and live your life. And in the evening, when you're reflecting back, you did that thing, you're a success. I know for me, ambition has never been a motivator. It's not like I want to become something or achieve this thing. And, that's, there's people have a lot of different opinions about that, and that's fine. For me, it's always about creating something. It's about contributing something. And it's also about the process, the nature of the work itself. And I said I wanted to talk about flow experiences. You hear these things where people say things like, I engage in work not because I enjoy it, but because it needs to be done. And there are things like that. But my question is, if the essence of your work itself is not bringing you enjoyment, are you really doing it well? Because when you look at flow, there are certain conditions. There are like 9 conditions, and I couldn't for the life of me rattle them off the top of my head. But 1, you need to be really clear on why you're doing what you're doing. It has to be personally important. 2, focus and concentration. And there's got to be this level of effort. Like, people talk about grinding as if effort and enjoyment are the antitheses of one another. It's almost a measure of one another. Because like to get into that flow state, you've got to have an equal balance of your skill set at the current moment and the challenge. So, if you're engaging in something that's so far beyond your skill sets, you're not going to learn, you're not going to grow, you're not going to produce anything worthwhile. What you're going to produce is a state of anxiety and frustration. And if you're not working hard enough, it's not going to be fulfilling, and you're going to be bored, and maybe even frustrates you. So that challenge is necessary. That's hard. It's hard to focus. It's hard to shut off your mobile phone. It's hard to not multitask and just focus intently on the task at hand. But if you do that and the conditions are right, within about 10, 15 minutes, you disappear. Everybody's had this, or I would imagine a lot of people have had this, where you're working on something that's meaningful and it's really hard work. It's not easy to do. And then you pick your head up and it's like, wait a minute, 4 hours went by.
Yeah.
It's not only where did the time go, it's where did I go? And then you realize at the end of that 4 hours that you had this deep level of engagement and enjoyment. So if what you're working really hard on is not eliciting any joy, is it really meaningful to you? Are you single-mindedly focusing on something? Or are you kind of like an octopus on rollerblades? A lot of motion, but no real direction, because you're not really getting down to creating something or producing something. You're doing a lot of stuff and calling that hard work. But what's the outcome you're facilitating? I think that's an important question. I know that there are times where, you can't do everything that you want to do, or some people are in situations where it's like, no, the purpose of my work is to feed my family. I hate my job, but I got people depending on me, and that's my purpose. And that is so understandable. But if you're that person that's saying, well, I do this because, you're also probably the same type of person that's saying, well, the nature of your work is a choice. Doesn't mean it's going to change today, but it's a series of choices. What are the choices you're making that's robbing you of engagement and enjoyment? Because that's also robbing you of optimal performance given your personal potential.
When you were talking before about sitting on the plane next to your mate who was looking at watches and cars in airplane magazines, and you rebuked him in all your righteousness, how are you different from that guy? And by that, I mean, I feel like you and work, you and your career, you and your knowledge, it was one. Like, that's where you got your sense of self from, what you know, and your skill and your job. Is there space between those things and you now?
Yeah, I think there is. I mean, I love spending time with my wife. Like, I'm proud of the relationship and dynamic we've built and the challenges that we navigate together. I love my mates. It just so happens that for such a long period of time, my closest mates were intertwined with my work. So, and you said something earlier. You want to talk about success. When you don't know where your work ends and where your play begins, that's success. And when you are chastising someone who is a legend in front of a room and can teach complicated concepts with fun and simplicity in a way that evokes confidence in the audience, and you're chastising that guy because he saw a car that he thinks is kind of cool, that's not success. That is not the mark of a successful life. Yeah. Hey, mate, I love chatting to you. You're always fascinating and interesting, and I know that. And for those who don't know, who met Bobby today for the first time, how can they connect with you? Where do you want to direct our listeners? You can go to robertcapuccio.com. I'm there. Well, I'm not technically there. It's virtual. But yeah, you can send me a message. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not big on social media for a lot of reasons that are beyond the scope of this conversation. But LinkedIn is probably the best social media platform to catch me. I think you also have Self-Help Antidote. I do have a podcast, the Self-Help Antidote. Thank you for that.com. All right, mate. Appreciate you. Love you. We'll say you, mate. We'll say goodbye off air, but thanks, dude. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Visit us at theselfhelpantidote.com to share your feedback, insights, and recommendations on what topics you'd like us to explore in the future.